For me, it is how Morocco reported Senegal to FIFA and CAF for allegedly using African spirituality or African magic in an African nations final in Africa. Africans are the most discriminated by Africans.
African Football Disciplinary Board has imposed heavy sanctions on the Senegal and Moroccan football federations.
The politics of identity at AFCON 2025 were wild. My name is Ivan Mnashikatseri. I'm an African social psychologist, and here's my analysis of what happened at the AFCON 2025 finals. The Lions of Teranga won the 2025 African Cup of Nations after defeating the Atlas Lions to lift the AFCON 2025 Cup. Now, I am not a soccer fan by any means, but where two lions claim to be kings of the African continent, I had to bear witness. And this was true for not only me, but other Africans and other people around the globe. AFCON 2025 epitomized the elusive nature of African identities. But at least for me, it also epitomized how Africans remain non-kings in their own jungle. Let me explain this for a second. The tournament, from its inception, it made salient a lot of questions. And among these questions, it included who is the real African and also how many identities actually exist in the African continent. If there is one thing that I know about Africans, it is the fact that we know who should not be African. But also in the same breath, we don't know who really should be an African. Racism in the form of bananas being thrown in the field, bullying claims, improper accommodation, match fixing, and other allegations that included towel theft, African magic allegations, and bad refereeing, they all contributed to marring the tournament, with the final actually being delayed for 6 minutes in the 90th minute as a culmination of all these misgivings. But what did Senegal and Morocco choose to do with this conflict? From all these claims that marred the tournament, FIFA has chosen to focus on the 6 minutes of protest where Senegal stood up for the negative treatment during the tournament. Now, this is arguable, but I want you to stick with me because it is something that Senegal and other nations claimed to have faced during the tournament, but this was neglected by FIFA and by CAF, and this was not reprimanded. African identities remain and are elusive. Specifically, when you think of the word African, it continually and is consistently has been evaded by some. And these are the same people who opt for location rather than a continental representation of Africa. So the North, for example, North Africans have characteristics that are different from Africans. Southern Africans have their own categories of being better than Africans. While in the same breath, I have to say the East and the West Africans are sometimes perceived as their own category of Africans or the West Africans. Pan-Africanism in the African continent is a theoretical concept. And this theoretical concept is reserved for political discourse. It is digested only in text, but it is impossible to practice. Stick with me here as I'm taking this somewhere. The racism that depicted AFCON was introduced by African countries, and it was towards Africans. AFCON was coined the Monkey Cup, and this was done by Africans. And there were allegations of Africans being racialized and discriminated during the tournament by Africans. Africans alleged that African teams were using juju or African magic during the tournament. This was used or served to depict these Africans as uncivilized or the evil other who are untalented, and they resort to using juju rather than skill. But they had a solution for this, the civilized Africans, so to speak. And I'm made to think of this because FIFA and CAF did not address the stealing of the towels. They did not address the fight for the towels of the civilized Africans, so to speak. By the way, is it not weird that African magic is a scary phenomenon rather than some celebration of the African beauty? The mere fact that Europeans can and do actually practice the practice of praying before a game, and this is also practiced by other African countries and accepted. But when African spirituality is introduced, it is protested, it is vilified, it is demonized. For me, that's wild. One of the Moroccan politicians actually accused Senegal of using African magic to stop the penalty that was awarded to Morocco. How wild is that? Anyway, I digress. But my point is, although these allegations do not justify the conflict in Africa, they begin the process of actually explaining why we find African identities so contested and also so elusive. Africans are the other in the African continent, and they are the most discriminated by other Africans or people who don't identify as Africans or with African identities, but they still and remain identifying with as part of the 54 countries in Africa. This is much deeper than the time that I have to explain, but also finds expression in moments in the AFCON tournament and various narratives that actually emanate from the African continent and AFCON. Let me give you an example of how African identities can be denied, but also can be rejected and can be avoided. In 1984, Morocco left the African Union and they initiated a bid in 1987 to formally apply for membership of the European communities. This is where Morocco is, just for those who don't know. 34 years later, Morocco campaigned to be reinstated in the African Union, and in 2017, this was granted. Although Morocco was not part of Africa, so to speak, they still contested in AFCON, reaching quarterfinals a couple of times. They managed to reject the African identity and the African community, but remained beneficiaries of Africa's resources and wealth and the communal space. Although North African countries, they never really formally applied to be part of Europe. Trade relations show that countries like Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, they still maintain trading ties with Europe. And part of this trade has been the slave trade that has occurred historically in North Africa and the slave trade that is currently being swept under the rug, with the trade and resource being Africans. Of course, it's not North Africans. This has been a point of conversations during AFCON, and this has been brought about by AFCON. Some North Africans, they were making blatant and straightforward comments about who is perceived as a slave and who has delusions of being a master. North Africans also perceive their identities as being under attack as well, and we have to take account of this. This has been mentioned by example of an ex-user who cited jealousy and hatred experienced by Moroccans. And these Moroccans are referred to in some cases as Tamil Europeans in this post. But the same person admits to be a slave owner who owns Africans and calls them blackie, and threatened to resume the slave trade just 3 days before the post was made. Whether North Africans are competing against Africa, Southern Africans chasing other Africans out of Africa, or West Africans being called the worst Africans, African identities have been rejected, denied, and struggle to find belonging in the African continent. The language that is mobilized against these identities make it clear that this still remains a contested space. Africa still remains a contested space. But one thing that I know and one thing that I believe in is that calling on FIFA and external parties with delusions of superiority only serves to divide us further. It only serves to divide us further as it presents us as slaves who want the master to resolve their issues. The lions of Teranga, Atlas lions, the indomitable lions, warriors, Bafana, super eagles, the zebras, they will just be names of animals and beings that are roaming a place that they cannot call home, or a continent that they cannot call home. They're just trophy hunters who themselves are prizes for those who are perceived as civilized to hunt. That's just my 2 cents.
Africans on Africa, let's go.